Hello and welcome to the Srijan Wednesday webinars. If you're joining us for the first time, this is a community initiative by Srijan Technologies where you can tune into a variety of sessions across the fields of technology, entrepreneurship, and community building. In today's session, we have with us Nancy Sharma, Agile coach at Srijan Technologies. In this session, Nancy shares with us the secret to bridging the gap between the product that you build and the product that your customers want. We look at how a combination of Scrum and Lean methodology is best suited to creating customer value. Before we begin, I would request all participants to please type in any questions that you have and we can take them up in the last 15 minutes of this session. Also, please don't forget to take the conversation live on Twitter using the hashtag SrijanWW, and you can share your thoughts by tagging us in your tweets using our handle @Srijan. So now that that's over, let's get right to Nancy's presentation. Nancy, over to you.
Thank you for the intro and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining in. Today we are going to talk about, the title of my presentation says how to build products that your customers want. And that's the kind of elixir that everybody is looking around for. So I'll attempt to answer this question today, and I'm hopeful that would be useful for you when you take this back to your work. So before we jump in to the core of the matter, a quick insight into who am I. I've been an Agile enthusiast for about 10 years now, been a speaker at various Agile conferences and an active community member. At present, I'm working as an Agile coach at Srijan. And when I'm not working, I like to blog on my personal blog. I blog about fitness and parenting, and I blog at thethinkigrade.com. So if you feel like paying a visit, feel free to come and read my blogs. With that said, I'll move on to the matter of the hour. So we are trying to answer the question that how can we build the products that our customers would really love, which would bring in a lot of revenue and profit, and most importantly, would be a sustainable mode of growth for our startup, our organization, our idea, whatever it may be. So before we attempt to answer that question, let me bring you back to how we are doing now. Over the 10 years, I have been a developer myself. I have done product development, software development as a service. I have been into situations where I'm donning the hat of product owner, Scrum Master, a lot of roles, and I've seen quite a projects by now. So if I look back at the journey and I sample across what has been the mode of our initiation, what were the conversations we were trying to attempt while we were in the phase of visualizing or in the phase of inception of the idea into a product. So if I look back, our questions were mostly, can this product be built? Or how can we build this product right? So now if I look back and scan these questions, I see a kind of smell. Smell being, both these questions are talking about how to build it right. As engineers, we quickly jump our guns. We talk about high coding standards. We would want to see loosely coupled code, scalable framework, 90% code coverage, continuous integration, continuous deployment, automated test gates, code quality reports, and a lot of other stuff which gives us the confidence on the engineering side that the piece that we are building has a lot of engineering finesse into it. We try to answer this question from technology standpoint, that the technology that I am choosing to solve this problem would actually solve this problem, and I'll be able to build something that works. But the smell here is, where is the customer or the user in this whole conversation? Our conversation is mostly centered towards the execution, or the other word maybe towards the engineering practices, and how to master the engineering practices right and build something which is of absolute good quality and very high coding standards. But in this whole conversation, we are missing the point. Who are we building this for? Do they have this problem? Would my solution really help them? Which brings me to the next point, that instead of asking the questions we've been asking so far, what we should be focused on is, should this product be built? When we put something like this, the whole attention moves towards the customer, his or her problem, and the question whether what I am building is actually going to solve the problem and will be useful for my customer. And hence, I can expect my customers to buy them. While we are not talking about this question, it is also essential to understand that the biggest risk or the biggest waste in software development is about building something that nobody wants. You might have used the latest buzz technology. You might have built really solid technical product which talks about right technical practices and engineering practices. But if there is no customer to use it, it all goes as a complete waste. Waste of skills, waste of resources, waste of money, waste of timeline. It's a total waste. Not launching is painful. We would want to hit the market early to test the waters, to get the feedback, to get a feeler of how we are doing. But if we are not learning in this process, that's the complete failure that we are putting ourselves to. To top of it, when we talk about customers, we talk about putting them at the center point. The bigger problem is the customer themselves at times do not know what they want. If you reach out to your customer and you just plainly put the question, what is your problem? What is your biggest problem? How would you want to see it to be solved? Do you think you would want this versus this? If you have such direct questions for your users, sometimes the users might not be very sure of whether to choose option A or option B. But as humans, as people, we generally find it easier to compare. We find it easier to compare with a reference, to have something to see, and then talk about what else did we want or did we expect. So it's easier for them if we put something in their hands. This makes the whole situation a bit tricky. So you want to put customers into the focal point, you want to focus on what they want, but at the same time, you're saying at times they wouldn't be sure of what they want. So the amount of uncertainty here is huge at both the ends. And that is the challenge. And that is why everybody is trying to find answer to this problem, that how can we build something that customers want? For those of you who do not know Steve Blank, I'll be talking about him further in my deck as well. So Steve Blank is a serial entrepreneur and now an academician around the Silicon Valley. He's been somebody who has put this whole conversation around customer-centric discussions, customer-centric development long back in around 2000. And the lean startup methodology, or the movement that I'm going to talk about in my presentation today, is inspired from what Steve Blank had worked around customer development in early 2000. And what he figured out was most of the businesses fail from lack of customers. You would not really hear failure due to failure of product development quite often. Though the failure of building the product right also happens. I'm not neglecting that or not negating that, but the failure due to a lack of customers, lack of market, lack of traction is way higher than the latter, which should make us think that if the failure of not having customers is huge, why do we not have a process to manage customer development? Our agile methodologies, Scrum, Kanban, Lean, XP, they are more towards developing the product right, the engineering practices, the execution mode. But there is no process which determines that the business idea or the statement of work or the user stories that we are feeding into the execution cycle are actually the ones which are solving the customer problem. So we are kind of neglecting and not using any process to manage customer development. Hence, we are still at the same question: how to build products that customers would love. So with this insight into the problem statement, let me move on to how I think this problem can be solved. The very first contender for this, I would say, is the lean startup movement. Uh, as I said, Eric Ries is the person who started the lean startup movement, and he was student of Steve Blank. So the a lot of context of lean startup has been inspired by the work of Steve Blank around customer development. And lean definitely comes from the lean thinking, which originally started from manufacturing. Toyota example, wherein we tried to pick up lean thinking concepts and try to apply it into software development. So how would I sum up the lean startup principle or the lean startup movement? It is simply the application of lean thinking to innovation process. It's quite crisp and to the point, but let me try to explain it a bit further. The very first thing here to understand here is, though the name talks about startup, it is the lean startup movement. A lot of people take it as something which is only applicable to startups. And their idea of startup is a group of folks trying to build something in a garage or a dingy office. But that's not the definition of startup that Eric Ries wants to communicate around. So I'll come up later into what he means by startup, but just to start the conversation on lean startup principles, let me just try to sum it as the goal of a startup or anybody who's trying to innovate something is to figure out the right thing. The right thing means thing that customers want and will be ready to pay for it as quickly as possible. As I said, it's inspired by lean thinking. So it definitely brings in the concepts of just-in-time development, measurement-driven, accelerated development cycles. As I said, if you make something that nobody wants, it doesn't matter if you have reached your market well within the time, even lesser than the original budget, nobody cares about it because essentially it is not adding any value to anybody and nobody's ready to use it or ready to pay for it. Now, what is the difficulty with innovation? Anybody who's trying to innovate an idea, who's trying to build something which has not been tried or has a different perception to a problem statement, there's a lot of inherent uncertainty. I talked about it in the beginning, uncertainty at the level of who are the users, what they would want, and the fact being that the customers themselves are not always sure of what they want. So lean startup is a methodology or a set of best practices. Mind you, it's not a framework. It's set of best practices that help startups or people who are trying to innovate or trying to ideate an idea into a product to move in right direction quickly by systematic experimentation. I've picked this definition from Wikipedia. It's quite verbose. It says lean startup is an approach for launching businesses and products that rely on validated learning, scientific experimentation, and iterative product releases to shorten the product development cycles. That's one. To measure progress. That's two. And lastly, to gain valuable customer feedback. Quite verbose. How I understand is it's simply a process which will help you to validate or invalidate your assumptions that you make at the beginning as quickly as possible to discover and deliver what people actually want. Okay, so we have delved quite a bit into what lean startup actually means. It's now time to move into the details. So lean startup is essentially guided by 5 principles. The first one, entrepreneurs are everywhere. So again, coming back to the confusion of entrepreneurs or startups, people see them in a different light, and they might feel that lean startup might not apply to me or my organization. But according to Eric Ries, the concept of entrepreneurship includes anyone who works within the definition, that is, a human institution or people designed to create new products or services under the conditions of extreme uncertainty. Essentially, if you're trying to innovate or trying out something under a lot of uncertainties, then lean startup terms you as an entrepreneur, and lean startup is completely applicable to your situation, your organization. The second is entrepreneurship is management. A lot of people think that if you're starting up something, if you're ideating and moving towards conceptualization of a product or building a product, it's a random and a chaotic mode to achieve. However, what Eric feels is if you want to build a sustainable business, you would want to bring some management to the chaos, which should be the way startups or innovation should work. So kind of adding a process to chaos is what lean startup is trying to do. The other important point that he wants to make is about validated learning. So when we started the Agile movement, we had a lot of emphasis on learning, feedback, in terms of retrospective, we want to retrospect what have we done, what are the learnings we can take out in terms of action items, and how do we want to put that feedback back into the execution loop to improve from there, right? So we all know that we have to learn from our past experience. But what he's trying to, the point that he's trying to make here is learning is one thing. Validated learning is something which is proven in terms of numbers and outcomes. So he wants to stress on the concept of validated learning. To do that, there is a concept of measure, learn, process. So this core feedback loop, as we call it, was So it says, whenever you have an idea, you start with a hypothesis. You assume something at the start as an idea. For example, um, okay, I over the years, while I'm associated with Agile methodology, I've learned one thing, that all these things that we talk here in terms of software development are basic common sense. And you can easily apply it to your day-to-day life to see the changes and actually understand the concept of the core. So let me do that here with a personal example that I can put here. I write about parenting and fitness. So I have a moonshot wherein I want to write a book on motherhood and fitness. So the basic hypothesis that I am building here is that the moms in India like to read. First of all, they like to read books. Second, moms in India would like to read a book on fitness, which means that they are keen to be fit. So those are my hypotheses that I am thinking on top of my mind to convert my idea into a book. Now, what if I decide to take off for a year, get somewhere to get into the zone of writing the book, coming out after a year with a book which, if I'm lucky, gets published and reaches to the bookstore? But what if nobody picks it up? So what the feedback loop here is telling me that yes, you have an idea, you have a hypothesis that you want to write a book, assuming that moms in India like to read books and they are keen on fitness, they want to keep themselves fit. So what should you do? You should first build something, convert probably your hypothesis into a thin slice, which we also call as MVP. I'm going to talk about MVP further. So build something, convert it into a product, and then measure from that MVP how your customers respond. Which means that while I am inside this feedback loop, probably I'm just trying to get answer to my hypothesis that mothers in India are keen to be fit. And I would like to measure, then I need to set the right matrices to understand how my customers are going to respond. If I'm just going to think about the matrices like how many visitors I have on my blog, if I have about 1,000+ visits on my blog in a month, that's a good uh, number for me to get motivated. But that is not going to show me the right outcome. I need to focus on how many of my visitors are females, are mothers. What are they actually reading? Are they reading only fitness blogs? How much time are they spending? What is the retention ratio? Are they coming back? So there are a lot of meaningful matrices that I can put out to measure how my hypothesis stands true or false to the customers that I'm trying to reach. So while I measure, I will have data. And with this data, I have a validated learning, which would either tell me that yes, mothers in India are reading about, they are reading my blogs on fitness, which shows their interest in fitness. There might be other things I would want to chalk out before I actually jump into writing the book. So there'd be n number of hypotheses that I would want to validate before I, build the complete book around it. So I'm just talking about one hypothesis. I pick up the data that I collect from my website analytics. And from there, I learn whether to go with this idea, whether to complete this loop, which is called preserve, or to pivot, which means that this hypothesis stands invalidated. I need to come out of this loop, get on to our next hypothesis, and again start this feedback loop. So this build, measure, learn is the core of Lean Startup principle, which, if you think, is also inspired by lean thinking. In manufacturing, Holding inventory is a waste. Overproduction is a waste. You would want to go into small batches and produce just in time. So the feedback loop is telling us to go into small batches, convert your bigger problem into smaller hypotheses, validate and validate each hypothesis in small batches by building MVPs. So that's the crux of it. So now coming to MVP. MVP has been a real interesting concept with me over the years. There was a time when I was working with a product owner, and I was actually having this conversation with her around Scrum and scope and MVP. And she suddenly retorted that, oh, MVP, whenever I hear this from my dev team, I'm aware that I'll have to make a compromise. So MVP to her was a compromise, that we are not able to give you what you want, but yes, we can give you an MVP, which is a compromised version of what my original backlog was, or what my original set of requirements were. So I was taken aback when I heard her saying that MVP is a compromise. What we want to put here is MVP is not a compromise. I generally call MVP as minimal awesomeness that you would want to give to your customers. So while we're talking about uncertainty of what our customers really want, do you think it's viable to go with a big bang approach? Would that be a common sense? When we don't know what they want, we have to figure it out. I think it's always logical to go step by step in smaller batches so that your waste is limited. You still have, it's okay to fail early, but you would still have the chance to recorrect your course. Definitely, resources are expensive. Everything comes with a cost. So if you're able to test something with minimal resources, with minimal cost, if you're able to get a feedback, I think that's great. And what MVP also helps us is it accelerates learning and faster traversing of the feedback loop I just showed. So essentially, MVP should be the cheapest and the fastest way to validate the riskiest assumption in the business model. Now, what mistake we generally do when we talk of MVP? At times, we do convert MVP into something that barely works, something that's barely there to show. So it's important to understand that minimum does not mean that you have to give a crappy product that nobody wants to use just for the purpose of having something there. That, okay, yes, we did build an MVP, but that was just an MVP. Some things weren't working. But that's what MVP is for, right? We are just trying to validate or invalidate. No, that's not MVP stands for. Essentially, what we are trying to do with MVP here is, if we know that the customer has a problem of traveling from point A to point B, then it doesn't matter if we give him a two-wheeler, a bicycle, or a luxury car, because the essential problem that the user is having is to travel from point A to point B. So whatever MVP we give out to the user should always ensure that the user is able to travel from point A to point B. If you just put in one wheel in the MVP and you build the rest of the body, this would not work for your user. So definitely the user would understand it as a compromise. But if you always ensure that your vehicle has minimum 2 wheels, maybe would not have a fancy seat to sit on, a cushiony seat to sit on, but it helps you travel even if the user is standing. As long as it helps the user to travel from point A to point B, user would be still able to see a value and give you a feedback. Now, the same example in a different context. If the problem that the user has is the experience, he or she is not liking the experience he or she has on a bike, then definitely there is a difference between if we give him a two-wheeler or if we give him a luxury car. right? So in this scenario, whatever MVP that we frame for the user should always take care that there is a good user experience associated with the MVP. So there are a lot of times we do make a mistake of visualizing the MVP, and it's often debatable that what an MVP should comprise of. So essentially, my recommendation here is you should always stick to the business problem of your user and ensure that your MVP at any stage solves that problem. So MVP is not a compromise. It's a visualization of a small batch wherein you're putting less stake to gain more feedback and try to get to a point where you're actually building something which the customer wants. So with small batches, your attempts increases, your chances to perfect increases. And that's what lean thinking is about. Now the concept of pivot or preserve, a very simple thing. To complete the loop, you either have the option of saying, yes, my hypothesis is right, and I think what we are doing is right. So my idea stands validated. We are solving the major pain area of our customers, and hence we should put this out to our customers and the market. Or you can say that, no, my hypothesis was wrong. It was not the same with my consumers, and we need to change our strategy. So pivot means that it's a course correction. You have to give up the existing hypothesis and the work done around it so far, and you need to re-strategize your product, your business model, and your engine of growth over another hypothesis. Okay, so far we have talked about the problem statement. We have understood how lean startup can help us. What are the objectives, the core concepts and principles in lean startup? We have understood the feedback loop, the concept of MVP, and whether to pivot or preserve. What does that mean? Now coming back to the problem. Whenever we have an idea and we want to build something, it always starts with a vision. And if we take a step back, vision is derived from people, our consumers, or our customers, or people in general, and their needs and pains. So when we observe people, understand their needs and pain, we find a vision of solving one of their problems or adding value to what they have currently, and we would like to add value over and above that and give them a better experience or a better solution. So it all starts with a vision. And that's an interesting statement again. It says that customers don't really care about the problem. They totally care about the problem and not your solution. So even if you build a very robust system, which is the masterpiece of the engineering practices that one should have today, they don't really care about that if that solution is not solving a problem of theirs. I have an example here from my personal experience. So we were doing product development for data quality leader in Netherlands. We were developing a master data management solution. So they had a lot of quality data and they wanted to build a master management solution over that data for end users, for admin, for organizations. So it was a very good product that we were building. Initially, we were understanding that who are customers, what kind of solution we would want to give it to them. And then we went into this cycle of building the product. We were using Scrum, we were having demos, we were retrospecting, churning our backlog, grooming our backlog, everything. But what essentially happened after a year of development, we built something which was working for us, which was solving a problem. But while developing over a year, we slightly alienated ourselves with what pains our users had currently. So what really happened, we built a system which had a huge number of configurations to do. So initially when we started putting in things, then we felt that, okay, this we don't want to tightly couple any configuration with the system. We would want it to be loosely coupled. So let's build a configuration file, add every variable there so that the user can change it and then use the system accordingly. But what really happened towards the end of it, there were about 100, 200, or 300 configuration variables that had to be set before the application could work for them. So though solution was working technically, logically, but the pain was that they had to do a lot of initial setup to the extent that we had to really make a position for configuration specialist for the MDM system, that whenever we have a customer subscription, we'll send our configuration manager there to set all the configurations for them and then get the system started for them. So the system really became huge and monstrous, that's what I call. And eventually we did not get a lot of customer traction. We had initial adopters, but they also really were not keen with what we had built, and we had to come back and make our course correction. But that course correction happened about after a year's time with a lot of investment already done. So that's a learning that we all should pick up, that customers care only about their problem. They don't understand your technology. They don't care about how technically strong, scalable your solution is. So all through this journey, it is essential to always be connected with your customers, always validate your learnings that you have made so far with respect to your customer's problem and the solution that you're trying to build. Which brings me to the other important pillar of lean startup. This is inspired by Steve Blank's work. Unfortunately, in this webinar, I'll not be able to completely delve into this because this is a big book in itself. So all those who wants to read about customer development, there's a book by Steve Blank called 4 Steps to Epiphany. Feel free to go back and read that book and get the complete context of what Steve Blank is trying to say. I'll try to sum it up here and keep it short so that we are able to hit our timeline. So quickly on customer development. So the emphasis should be on customers and market from day one, rather than technology, engineering practices, and the execution. Emphasis is on learning and discovery around customers, customer needs, market segments, even before you start execution. And it should be a repeatable process, mind you. So it's a parallel process to Agile development. What we do right now, whenever we start a project from scratch or we have an idea and we build it from scratch, we do the customer learning discovery workshops, we do story maps, we do customer interviews. But most of the times I've seen it only at the start. And eventually when we get into the execution mode, the emphasis on customer reduces till the time we have hit our execution milestone of, say, beta launch, or now we want to run our customer interviews. So there's a lot of time that goes in, and then we come back from our silos, and again then we try to map it with, oh, what our customers wanted, let us now take it to the customer. So rather than that, the emphasis on learning and discovery should be in small batches, the build, measure, and learn loops, small batches in terms of MVPs, and that should be before execution of every hypothesis. So Steve sums up customer development into 4 steps: customer discovery, customer validation. So these 2 steps together would help us decide whether to pivot or preserve. If we pivot, that means we move on to a new hypothesis on customer discovery altogether, and we again get into the validation. If we preserve, we move or get into the execution part. I'll talk about this in my next slide. What are the benefits of doing and focusing on customer development? You get to move faster because you're into smaller batches. So even if you fail early and you have the capacity to recorrect your course. It reduces risk because at every point of time you're trying to validate with what your customers want. So you've not invested in a big bang manner, you've still invested in a small batch. Bring process to chaos. Anything around customer deals with uncertainty. So it helps you to bring process and a bit of certainty, or at least uh, validated learning to chaos. It definitely helps you stay in tune with your customers and discover the best market opportunities. Now, coming to the concept of lean canvas, this again is driven from lean startup. So this lean canvas talks about summing up your problem, your solution. So summing up the product that you're trying to build or your hypothesis and how you plan your market to be for this particular product. So it brings everything in one picture as a canvas for you to always be aware of it and always try to validate it with your customer interaction. So now, what does Lean Startup say? It says that convert your vision into a lean canvas wherein you put everything about your customer, the problem, the risky assumptions that you're making, and then pick your riskiest assumption and put them into a feedback loop, test it, and then move forward. So a bit more detail on customer development. So the first step is customer discovery, then comes customer validation. And like I said, at this point of time, we either decide to pivot or preserve. So this is your steering phase. So during this phase, under the customer discovery, we essentially identify a problem. So we reach out to our, we go out. That's the first thing that Steve Blank says, that if you want to reach out to your customers and understand them, you have to get out of your building. You can't sit at your office space and make decisions or make assumptions about your customer. You have to go, you have to interact, you have to observe. So definitely you have to step out, go between them, and try to understand what your customer wants. You would want to run interviews to understand their pain areas and identify a problem or bring up a hypothesis. And the next step is customer validation, wherein you will design an MVP to validate whether your customer validation is correct or not. You would take that to your customer in terms of solution interviews. And then you would want to see or gauge whether the customer is interested, get an idea of how much the customer would be ready to pay for it, and do the customer validation. And the next two steps, I'm not dealing in detail at all in this webinar, so please help yourselves by reading the book, 4 Steps to Epiphany, and understand more insights into it. But I would abstract this into something about once the steering phase is done, once we are sure of our hypothesis, we have built an MVP, and we are absolutely sure that yes, my customer is going to pay me for this, my customer is excited about it, I bring that idea into execution now and eventually accelerate and create growth for my business idea. Details about how we do each of them. When we're talking about customer discovery, we do problem interviews. We definitely go out, meet them, talk to them, observe them to see what the problems are. Then we build a MVP from what we have understood and what we can think of as a solution. We build it, we take it to them, we run solution interviews to gauge how much traction would the customer give to your solution. Is that really solving any problem for them or not? And then decide about either to pivot or to preserve. Then the other side of it, getting new customers, is more towards execution. You want to now build something, build feature teams, A and B testing to see how different customers, interact with application and different flavors of the application. So The next two I would just abstract out as they then decide that how your execution is going to be, which we are already very good at as software engineers, as people who, engineering people are very good at building something. It's our internal bias. Whenever we get a problem, we just want to build something and then see what happens. So a quick check, when we say that yes, we have done the customer discovery, it means that you have identified a problem a customer wants to be solved. Your product solves customer needs. You believe you have a viable and profitable business model. You feel you have learned enough to go out and sell. So these are things you have checked out. And once you say that you are done with your customer validation, which means that you have proven that you found a customer problem. So via the MVP, you go back to solution interviews, you get the real outcomes from interaction of your solution with customer. So you prove that yes, either it's a problem or it's not an immediate problem that the customer wants to solve. Maybe something else is of higher priority for him or her. You find early evangelists that will pay you. So early adopters for your products, you think that yes, this person is showing interest and would definitely, come and buy my product. You found a repeatable and scalable sales process. So you have demonstrated a viable business model. So this means that now the idea or the business problem or the problem statement that I'm trying to feed into my engineering system or engineering teams, I am confident that when this comes out built correct from the engineering perspectives, I would be confident to take it back to my customer and expect a traction from the customer. Definitely within the timelines that might be associated with that particular customer or a market segment. So a quick gist that I'm trying to put towards the overall conversation, it's about customer discovery and customer validation. The first two steps here, the problem is unknown, solution is unknown. So we begin with hypothesis, experiments, insight, feedback loop, and we try to figure out that yes, this is the problem that we are going to solve because this is validated that this is a known user problem. And then we feed into our engineering teams or development teams where the technical solution is unknown. Now the team has to figure out how they're going to solve it. So again, this is an unknown, but we have a lot of trusted frameworks to help us solve that problem. Scrum, Kanban, XP, we have all of them to help us around in solving how to build it. And once we have built it, we have data, feedback, and insight to feed back into our customer development loop. So it's quick, incremental. We talk about minimum features to learn first, customer validation, and definitely revenue. So if we look back at how we do, when we say we are doing product development, we generally have an idea. We have a quick check around whether it's a good idea in terms of sometimes we do reach out to customer to validate it properly. Sometimes it's our gut feel that yes, this is an idea that we should really try our hands at. And from there, we move into development. We might be using Scrum, say for development cycles. We are running our sprints. We are demoing our product to our stakeholders, which may or may not be the end users. But we are running on a hunch that yes, we think that's the next big thing that we should tap. And eventually we get onto our delivery timelines. We hit the UAT or beta testing to get the feedback. Maybe at that point of time, we reach out to a small set of users to get the feedback on how they are using, whether they are liking it or not, and eventually to launch for a bigger audience and worldwide. So that's the process we generally follow. But what's the flaw in here? The flaw is there's no talk about the customer in the complete set. There's more emphasis on the execution and less on learning about the customer needs and validating those customer needs first, or maybe in a repeated cycle. And lack of meaningful sales marketing milestones. Whenever we get into product development phase, we always hear What are your release goals and timelines? When are we going to launch our first set of, product, which we may call MVP, then we call version 1, version 2, which are the incremental versions. So we do have timelines around execution, but we do not hear a lot of timelines around sales and marketing milestones, how often they are planning to go out to the consumers, how are they planning to go to a set of community which might help us gain traction about our product, kind of evangelize our product around into different set of users, so that we get to understand how do they feel about our solution. So those conversations are really missing when we do the traditional product development, even with agile methodologies. So now, how are we trying to change it? We're trying to say that keep doing the product development, which means the engineering side, applying agile principles, agile frameworks to run your execution, but add the flavor of lean startup to also connect the customer development to product development. So we say, do product development with lean startup principles applied, which would convert it into customer development. And when associated with lean startup, it does bring in the lean thinking, distinguishes value and waste, puts our focus only on value, what brings value to the customer. That's the essential thing that we're trying to understand. We use scientific methods to always validate our learning through numbers, through matrices, through user interactions, user interviews, getting into user community, all that of stuff, and small batches so that we have more shots at a successful outcome, lesser risk, less investment, and getting the feedback early. So to conclude, how can we build the products that customers want? To conclude, I would say, if we implement lean startup method, wherein we bring focus into customer development, try to figure out or validate the assumption before we feed into agile development or our engineering or execution, and keep this as a repetitive cycle. Then we are always putting our conversations centered around customer and value, which means that the outcome that comes out of our execution would always stand, or I would not say always, but most likely stand relevant to our customers. So as a parting thought, to conclude this webinar, there is a scientific method to follow agile principles on the business side. So we have agile principles, agile framework on the execution side, but we are now talking to bring focus on the business side, apply lean startup principles, talk about customer development to validate ideas before starting the product development, and keep this as a repetitive action for each MVP slice that you roll out. So use business model canvas or lean canvas to frame your hypothesis. Use customer development to get out of the building and test or validate your hypothesis, find your customers, find the problem statement, validate your problem statement, feed it into agile engineering, use agile frameworks, as we all do, to build the product iteratively and incrementally. In short, lean startup to build products that customers want. So that brings me to the end of the webinar. Thank you for staying with me till the end. And my last word would be, let's focus on building the right product rather than figuring out how to build the product right. I've left my coordinates on this slide in case you want to reach out to me for a personal conversation over this topic, anything that you want to discuss or any experience. Feel free to reach out to me and I'll be very happy to have conversation around it. So thank you, everyone. And in case we have questions, we can take them now.
Great. Thank you, Nancy, for taking us through that very in-depth and detailed sessions. And I know we are cutting very close to the time limit that we have, but we do have a couple of questions here that I would like to take up. So, uh, the first one is that I think you have already dealt with it in your presentation, but we still have the question, which is what are the key metrics that you need to be able to measure a lean startup?
Okay, so that's a very broad question, first of all. And for every situation, the matrices would differ. On a very high level, the answer would be that you should not go for vanity metrics, but actionable matrices. For example, like I said in my example about writing a book, if I just go by the number of visitors I have on my website on month by month basis, and if that's growing, that should not be the reason for me to write a book. That is not the right matrix that I'm trying to follow. What I need to focus on is out of those users, how many are females in a particular age category that I'm focusing on? How many of them are spending time reading my fitness blogs? How much are do they have higher bounce back ratio? Are they coming back on my blog? So those are the things I need to measure actually. And if I just measure the number of visitors or the number of likes, number of followers, they are just vanity matrices. You can't do anything about it. How would you really use that matrix? But if I rather focus myself on how many of them are spending time, what amount of average time they're spending on my blog, just to see that are they just coming and going? Are they reading it? Are they spending time? Are they leaving comments? Are they interacting with me or passing on the word? Those are the things I have to focus on to actually measure whether I should uh, preserve or pivot my particular hypothesis. So actionable metrics on which you can take certain action. So that will be my answer for this.
All right. And the next one we have is that towards the end of your presentation, you were focusing a lot on getting out of the building in order to discover what your customers actually want. Now, the question is, what if the product segment that you are trying to build is something that's only emerging in the market? So, I have an example here, which is, let's say you are building an app for personal helicopter owners in the future. So, now are you going to go out and interview traditional helicopter pilots who are already domain experts? Or are you going to go and interview somebody who now has a car but has the potential to, let's say, buy a personal helicopter in the future? So, who would you get out of the building to interview? Somebody who's already a domain expert or somebody who's actually going to be the buyer of your product?
So if you're trying out something new, which has not been tried out earlier, then definitely I would like to cover my grounds. I would like to go to the domain expert to understand the feasibility and the execution aspect, that whether building this product would be viable. That's one thing. And also would want to buy it. So yes, I would like to figure out, I would like to go out to people who probably have cars and who would want, whom I can see can have a need for that solution. So I would like to cover both the grounds. If you're building something wherein one flavor of it is already out there in the market, you're trying to bring a different perception, add more powerful features to get that same job done faster with a better user experience, then at that point of time, I'll focus only on my consumers who I can figure out had initially this problem, and bring my solution to them to see that now do they have a better user experience? Are they happy with the flow that I've built in? Does they really? I feel that they can do their job faster, but do they really feel that their job is simplified? So I would go to them. So it depends on what kind of thing you're attempting. But definitely going out is important, because sitting at the places that we work, we cannot really understand the user problem.
Right. So you're saying that getting out of the building is important, but who you approach for is sort of something that you have to play by the ear and be very intuitive about it as to who would be the right person to go and talk to or ask or interview, right?
Yeah, and sometimes you have to really experiment because, like I said, customers themselves don't know if they want. So if you show somebody who's driving a decent a decent four-wheeler, you know, and you show him or her a luxury car, at times few people would definitely say yes to a luxury car, but there would be some who would say, I don't really know if I need a luxury car. Then you might want him to sit in a luxury car and see the experience of a luxury car. Then he might be able to say that whether, oh, I think yes, I missed this particular feature in my car. Oh, this has, a better leg room. He might be feeling good about the legroom that he has in his own car, but when he sees or compares with what a luxury car can offer, maybe then he can get converted, right? So you have to run your experiments and you have to learn that what user section or user segment can you target. A lot of times you have to run experiments.
All right. Thank you, Nancy. I think that's all the time that we have today, and I would like to thank all our audience for being here and joining us for this session. And thank you, Nancy, for taking us through the session and then taking up all the questions that we had. So, if any of our listeners have any other questions for Nancy, all her details are right here. You can contact her, or you can send in your questions to us at webinars@srijan.net, and we will try and get them answered by Nancy. So you will have a recording of this session in your inbox by sometime tomorrow, and hope to see you for our next webinars. That's all from us today. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.